The corporate headquarters of Zenith Global Logistics always had a distinct scent on Thursday mornings. But today it smelled sharp, clinical, and unnaturally sterile. It was not the usual faint aroma of roasted espresso from the executive break room or the lavender polish used by the weekend janitorial team. It was the pungent, unmistakable smell of industrial bleach, as if someone had scrubbed the fourth floor to erase every trace of recent human presence. I walked through the glass doors holding my dark roast coffee, my leather briefcase heavy in my right hand. At 54 years old, I had spent 28 years navigating corporate boardrooms, logistics architecture, and high-stakes commercial development. I had survived 3 corporate mergers, 5 CEO transitions, and countless executive shakeups. As the senior director of commercial operations, I knew the rhythm of this building down to the exact hum of the ventilation shafts. And this morning, every instinct honed over nearly 3 decades told me that something in the building was profoundly out of alignment. I was halfway down the quiet marble corridor when an older gentleman stepped out from the utility alcove. He was wearing the dark blue uniform of the third-party facilities management crew, a graying beard trimming his weathered face. I had seen him around the building over the past month, quiet, methodical, never speaking unless he was addressed. His name tag read Ezekiel Thorne. He pulled his mop bucket to a stop, looked directly into my eyes, and spoke in a low, measured voice that cut clean through the quiet hallway. "Sir, they moved your laptop into conference room B at 6:42 this morning. Don't go in there yet." I stopped dead in my tracks. The hot coffee nearly sloshed over the rim of my ceramic mug. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice lowering to match his cadence. Ezekiel did not look away, nor did he alter his tone. "Saw a young lady in a green blazer take your workstation tower and laptop setup off your corner desk while the floor was still empty. She carried it into conference room B. A couple of executives went in right after her. If I were you, I would take a look through the side glass before you walk through that front door." Without waiting for a reply, Ezekiel dipped his mop back into the soapy water and resumed wiping down the baseboards with rhythmic, unhurried strokes. A cold wave of adrenaline rushed down my spine, tightening the muscles along my shoulders. My workstation was supposed to be locked. The executive wing keycards were strictly monitored, and my personal terminal held proprietary operational models for our proposed $500 million supply chain expansion deck. Instead of walking straight to my office, I turned down the secondary service hallway that looped around the back of the conference suites. The glass panels facing the main corridor were frosted, but the narrow side observation windows near the media control booth provided an unobstructed view of conference room B. I pressed myself against the wall and peered through the narrow pane of glass. Standing at the head of the polished mahogany conference table was 26-year-old Brianna Davenport. She was wearing a tailored emerald blazer, a pair of expensive designer heels, and an expression of supreme unearned confidence. She held a sleek digital laser pointer, pacing the front of the room like a seasoned executive presenting to a board of directors. Sitting around the table were 3 regional vice presidents and the executive vice president of business development, who also happened to be her father, Victor Davenport. My stomach did a violent downward drop. Projected across the 80-inch display screen was my master presentation deck. It was not merely a similar concept or an inspiration drawn from my work. It was my exact slide deck. The color schemes, the proprietary data visualization models, the structural layout of the automated routing hubs. All of it was displayed under the bold title slide, presented by Brianna Davenport, Senior Operations Analyst. Then my eyes caught slide 3. Late last night, sitting at my home desk at 11:45, I had been refining the financial forecasts. In my exhaustion, I had accidentally typed a small typo into the primary heading of slide 3, spelling the word partnership as partnership. I had noticed it right before shutting down my computer, making a mental note to correct the spelling before my formal briefing on Friday morning. That file had never been uploaded to the company's shared network drive. It had never been emailed to a single colleague. It resided exclusively on my encrypted local desktop hard drive, buried inside a private folder labeled Internal Drafts, Confidential. Yet there it was on the wall in giant 80-point font, Partnership. Brianna was standing there, pointing her laser beam directly at my typo, speaking in a chipper, practiced voice that bled softly through the doorframe. As you can see from my primary research, this strategic partnership will optimize our regional throughput by 34% within the first 2 quarters. My chest burned with cold surgical fury. Should I have kicked the heavy oak door open and screamed bloody murder? Should I have stormed inside, confronted Victor Davenport in front of his peers, and demanded to know why his daughter was parading my intellectual property as her own? 28 years in corporate America taught me one undeniable truth. An angry man in a room full of executives looks unstable, while a calm strategist with documented evidence looks like an executioner. If you want to catch a predator in corporate leadership, you do not throw stones into the brush. You let them walk completely into the cage and lock the gate behind them. I took a deep, steadying breath, turned on my heel, and retreated down the hallway toward the private quiet booths near the east elevator bank. Sitting inside the soundproof glass booth, I opened my personal smartphone and dialed the direct internal extension for Bradley Lawson, our lead information technology security analyst. Brad was a brilliant, no-nonsense systems engineer who had worked at Zenith for 9 years. He was the kind of administrator who cared about log files, network integrity, and absolute compliance rather than corporate politics. He picked up on the second ring, the background hum of the server room audible over the line. "Lawson here, Brad. It's Nate Prescott," I said, keeping my voice utterly level. "I need an immediate, off-the-record credential access audit for my primary workstation terminal." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the rapid clatter of mechanical keyboard switches. "Everything okay, Nate? I need you to check the hardware login logs for my desktop machine over the last 2 hours," I explained. "Specifically, whether my account credentials were used to authenticate a local session from conference room B or any other IP address inside the building." The typing accelerated into a steady rhythm. "Give me 20 seconds. Okay. Pulling your active session tokens now." "That's strange. Nate, where are you right now?" "I am standing in the east phone booth on the 4th floor." "Well, according to the domain controller, your primary user account logged into the physical terminal inside conference room B at 6:42 a.m. Absolute local time," Brad said, his tone shifting from casual to intensely serious. "The login originated from your machine's network interface, but the session was opened using your administrator access PIN. 5 minutes later, a local directory search was executed on your drive. A file named Commercial Expansion Master Deck version 4 was copied directly to a USB flash drive and transferred to a secondary user folder belonging to Brianna Davenport." I felt my teeth click together. "Can you verify the badge swipe for the executive floor entrance prior to that login?" "Hold on," Brad replied. The keys clicked again. "Card key swipe at the south executive door at 6:35 a.m. Belonging to badge number 4892, Brianna Davenport." "Nate, what the hell is going on? Did you authorize her to access your local drives?" "No, Brad, I did not," I said flatly. "Do not terminate that session, and do not lock the account yet. I need you to generate a full, cryptographically hashed export of those access logs, hardware addresses, and file transfer timestamps. Export them to an offline container and lock them in your secure vault." "Consider it done," Brad said without hesitation. "This is a direct violation of our corporate cybersecurity policy and federal data handling protocols. If someone used your master PIN, that's credential theft." "Thank you, Brad. I will be down to see you shortly." After hanging up, I leaned back against the wall of the booth and closed my eyes. The shock had worn off, replaced by a razor-sharp clarity. This was not an accidental oversight or a young analyst getting overly ambitious on a single project. This was a deliberate compromise of corporate security. I pulled up my personal cloud backup on my mobile phone and began cross-referencing past deliverables from the last 12 months. My mind raced backward through previous quarterly reviews, remembering odd moments that had bothered me at the time but had been brushed off as corporate overlap. 6 months ago, Brianna Davenport had presented a regional route optimization plan to the executive committee that had earned her a glowing write-up in the internal corporate newsletter. At the time, I had noticed that her proposed distribution hubs matched my early drafts down to the exact mile markers. But Victor Davenport had cut the meeting short before I could ask detailed technical questions. 8 months ago, she had spearheaded a third-party logistics cost reduction framework that won her a spot on the CEO's special task force. I opened my archived folders from that quarter side by side with her published white paper. The evidence was damning. The formatting was identical. The custom color palette I had spent 40 hours designing for client presentations was used throughout her document. Even worse, on page 14 of her cost reduction paper, there was a specific footnote citing an obscure statistical paper from a European logistics journal. I had misquoted the publication date as 1998 instead of 1999 when copying it from hardcopy book in my personal library. Brianna had left that exact erroneous date in her final submission to the board. She had been entering my office after hours, logging into my machine using credentials she must have spied or stolen, and systematically harvesting my intellectual property for over a year. Every promotion, every bonus, every glowing performance review she had received since joining Zenith Global Logistics was built upon my sweat, my expertise, and my late-night labor. And her father, Executive Vice President Victor Davenport, had shielded her every step of the way, ensuring her presentations received immediate approval, while keeping me isolated in operational management. I opened my email application and began drafting a message to Associate Legal Counsel Gwen Montgomery. Gwen was a 38-year-old corporate compliance attorney who had spent 7 years in federal prosecutor offices before joining Zenith. She was known throughout the organization as an uncompromising legal technician who had zero tolerance for executive self-dealing or statutory noncompliance. I attached the initial IT access, log confirmation from Brad, screenshots of my time-stamped local files, side-by-side comparative analysis of the 4 stolen presentations, and the metadata receipts proving that Brianna Davenport had never authored a single original slide of the company's core strategic expansion plan. My fingers were steady as I typed the final sentence of the email. I am requesting an immediate, confidential legal audit regarding unauthorized network access, systemic intellectual property theft, and executive credential misuse under federal statutory frameworks. I pressed send, adjusted my tie in the mirror, and walked out of the booth to begin the final phase of the trap. 20 minutes later, I sat in the windowless, soundproofed corner office of Associate Legal Counsel Gwen Montgomery. The room was lined with thick legal volumes, Federal Reporter series, and organized stacks of compliance audits. Outside her glass window, the gray morning sky over the downtown skyline reflected off the steel structures of the commercial port. Gwen sat behind her oak desk, her spectacles pushed up on her forehead, reviewing the printed stack of evidence I had brought with me. Beside her sat Brad Lawson from Information Technology, who had brought an encrypted laptop displaying the raw domain controller logs. Silence reigned in the room for 4 full minutes while Gwen read through every line of file metadata, hash comparisons, and badge access timestamps. When she finally set the papers down, her face was completely devoid of humor. Her dark eyes were sharp, calculated, and intensely focused. "Nathaniel," Gwen began, her voice steady and precise. "Walk me through the local drive configuration on your workstation." My primary desktop terminal is connected to the corporate domain, but local project drafts are stored within a BitLocker encrypted volume, I explained calmly. The only way to access those local files is by physically sitting at my desk and inputting my alphanumeric user PIN or by initiating an administrative override from an authorized terminal. At 6:42 this morning, while I was in transit to the office, my workstation was logged into from Conference Room B using my exact credentials. The files were pulled, exported to an external drive, and immediately loaded onto Brianna Davenport's user profile. Gwen turned to Brad. "Is there any technical possibility of a domain glitch or an automated background backup task creating this log signature?" Brad shook his head firmly. "Zero chance, Gwen. We verified the MAC address of the physical network port inside Conference Room B. We verified the local session token creation. Furthermore, we cross-referenced the badge swipe logs. Brianna Davenport swiped into the executive suite at 6:35 a.m. She walked into Nate's office, powered on his machine, authenticated the session, and transferred the presentation deck. We have clear, uninterrupted chain of custody logging. Gwen leaned back in her high-backed chair, intertwining her fingers. This is far beyond an internal personnel dispute or a simple corporate policy violation. What we are looking at here is a clear, egregious violation of federal law. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and began listing statutory citations with rapid practice strokes. First, Gwen said, pointing her pen at the pad. Unauthorized access to a protected computer system using stolen credentials to misappropriate proprietary commercial assets constitutes a direct violation of Title 18, Section 1030 of the United States Code, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Second, these strategy documents contain non-public commercial formulas, client routing algorithms, and trade secrets worth millions of dollars. Taking them without authorization triggers federal liability under the Defend Trade Secrets Act of 2016. She paused, looking directly at me. And third, because Victor Davenport is an executive vice president and a corporate officer, his active participation in facilitating his daughter's unauthorized access and presenting stolen strategic assets to potential investors, and the board of directors constitutes a gross breach of fiduciary duty, specifically the duty of loyalty and candid disclosure under Delaware General Corporation Law. What is our legal exposure if this deck is presented to the board of directors and prospective financial partners today? I asked, keeping my voice cool. If Victor and Brianna present your proprietary models as their own to external investors, Zenith Global Logistics could face massive statutory liability, shareholder derivative suits, and immediate federal injunctions, Gwen stated flatly. Victor Davenport has exposed this corporation to catastrophic legal jeopardy simply to manufacture a fraudulent executive career for his daughter. Gwen stood up, smoothing the front of her dark gray tailored suit. She picked up the encrypted flash drive Brad had prepared, along with a copy of my evidence binder. Nathaniel, the formal board audit committee and executive strategy session is scheduled for 10:30 this morning in the main executive boardroom, Gwen said, a dangerous quiet in her tone. Victor Davenport plans to use your presentation to secure board approval for a $50 million capital allocation, with Brianna named as the lead executive director of the expansion. I am aware, I replied. Good, Gwen said, her eyes flashing with legal instinct. We will not interrupt them before the meeting begins. We will allow Victor and Brianna to formally open the presentation, hand out the printed hard copies, and place their formal signatures on the executive submission documents. The moment those documents are signed and presented to the board, their statutory liability becomes absolute and irrevocable. And then? Brad asked with a grim grin. And then, Gwen answered, opening her office door, we step inside and conduct a live compliance audit in front of the entire board of directors. At 10:25 in the morning, the atmosphere outside the main executive boardroom on the 20th floor was electric. Attendants in black vests were serving iced water and coffee to visiting members of the board audit committee, external financial advisors, and major institutional investor representatives. Inside the boardroom, the massive conference table was surrounded by 16 high-level executives. At the head of the table sat board chairman Howard Kincaid, a seasoned industrialist with snowy white hair, sharp blue eyes, and a reputation for ruthless fiscal discipline. Sitting to his right was Executive Vice President Victor Davenport, looking immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, beaming with aristocratic pride. Next to him sat Brianna Davenport, nervously adjusting her designer blazer and shuffling printed copies of my presentation deck. I stood near the back corner of the room, leaning casually against the wood-paneled wall, holding a single leather folder under my arm. Nobody paid attention to me, to the visiting board members. I was merely another senior operations director present to answer technical questions if called upon. At precisely 10:30, Chairman Kincaid knocked his wooden gavel on the table. Gentlemen and ladies, let us bring the executive strategy session to order. Today we are reviewing the proposed commercial expansion plan for our regional logistics network, a $50 million capital commitment. Victor, the floor is yours. Victor Davenport stood up smoothly, buttoning his jacket, displaying a broad, charismatic smile. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Today is a monumental milestone for Zenith Global Logistics. Over the past 6 months, my team, spearheaded by senior analyst Brianna Davenport, has developed a groundbreaking proprietary routing architecture that will revolutionize our commercial throughput. Victor motioned toward Brianna, who stood up with a radiant smile, grabbing the remote control for the primary display screen. "Thank you, Vice President Davenport," Brianna began, her voice dripping with artificial poise. "Members of the board, what you see before you is the culmination of nearly a year of intensive algorithmic research and commercial modeling that I personally authored." She clicked the remote. The 80-inch screen illuminated, displaying the master title slide of my deck. She handed physical bound copies of the proposal to Chairman Kincaid and every board member present. Each document bore a formal executive certification page signed by Victor Davenport and Brianna Davenport, attesting under corporate penalty that the strategy was original, proprietary, and ready for board execution. I watched silently from the back of the room as Brianna flipped to slide 3, pointing her laser beam at the screen. "Our primary focus rests on this strategic partnership framework." She did not even notice the typo as she read it aloud. She spoke for 10 minutes, reciting my research word for word, taking grand credit for the financial projections, the infrastructure layouts, and the operational timeline I had spent 5 years perfecting. Victor sat beside her, nodding proudly, looking around the table to gauge the impressed reactions of the board members. Chairman Kincaid leaned forward, looking over his reading glasses at the bound document. "This is an extraordinarily detailed framework, Brianna. The route optimization matrix on page 12 is particularly impressive. How did you derive these dynamic cost coefficients?" Brianna froze for a fraction of a second, her hands gripping the podium. Yes, Mr. Chairman. The cost coefficients were derived through extensive internal data modeling and iterative testing that I developed during the second quarter." Victor quickly chimed in. "Brianna's analytical rigor on this point was exhaustive, Howard. She personally built those mathematical models from the ground up." That was the exact moment the heavy double doors at the entrance of the boardroom clicked open. Associate Legal Counsel Gwen Montgomery walked in, followed immediately by lead IT security analyst Brad Lawsons and the Vice President of Human Resources. Gwen carried a thick leather litigation brief, her expression cold, resolute, and imposing. Victor Davenport's brow furrowed in immediate irritation. "Gwen, what is the meaning of this interruption?" "We are in the middle of a formal board authorization vote." Gwen ignored Victor completely, walking straight to the head of the table and standing directly beside Chairman Howard Kincaid. "Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the interruption, but as Associate Legal Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer, I am legally obligated to halt this proceeding immediately due to active statutory violations and emergency compliance breaches," Gwen announced in a clear, commanding voice that echoed off the mahogany walls. The room went dead silent. Board members stopped turning pages. Victor Davenport's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "What nonsense is this?" Victor demanded, slamming his palm onto the table. "This is an executive presentation. You have no standing to interrupt a board vote." "I have absolute standing under Delaware corporate law and federal compliance mandates, Vice President Davenport," Gwen replied without breaking eye contact. She turned to Chairman Kincaid. "Mr. Chairman, before this board votes to approve a $50 million commitment based on the certified documents before you, we must address a single critical question." Gwen paused, her eyes sweeping over Brianna, who had turned pale as parchment. "Who authorized the physical break-in and unauthorized credential access of Senior Director Nathaniel Prescott's encrypted workstation at 6:42 a.m. this morning to steal these exact presentation files?" A collective gasp echoed across the executive boardroom. Chairman Howard Kincaid slowly lowered his reading glasses, his blue eyes hardening into ice. "Explain yourself, Ms. Montgomery," Kincaid demanded, his voice dropping an octave into absolute authority. Gwen motioned to Brad Lawson, who plugged his encrypted laptop directly into the boardroom's primary media console. With a single keystroke, Brianna's presentation was instantly replaced by a massive digital audit display showing domain controller logs, physical security badge timestamps, and network access signatures. "At 6:35 this morning," Gwen explained calmly, Pointing to the screen, security badge 4892, belonging to Brianna Davenport, was swiped at the fourth-floor executive entrance. At 6:42 a.m., Mr. Nathaniel Prescott's locked local terminal was accessed using stolen administrative PIN credentials. The file presented to you today, down to the exact digital file hash, timestamp metadata, and even a specific typographical error on slide 3, was copied directly from Mr. Prescott's private encrypted drive. Gwen clicked a button, displaying side-by-side comparisons of 4 major corporate projects from the past year. Furthermore, an emergency IT forensic audit completed 1 hour ago confirms a continuous 12-month pattern of systemic digital theft. Every single major deliverable credited to Brianna Davenport over the past year was stolen directly from Nathaniel Prescott's workstation after hours. Victor Davenport leaped to his feet, his chair screeching violently against the hardwood floor. This is an outrageous, fabricated witch hunt. My daughter is a brilliant analyst. A system glitch or administrative file sharing easily explains any login overlap. Nathaniel Prescott is simply jealous of a young executive's rise. Silence, Victor. Chairman Kincaid thundered, slamming his gavel down so hard the water glasses rattled. Kincaid turned his piercing gaze toward Brianna, who was standing frozen at the podium, her lip trembling uncontrollably, sweat breaking out along her hairline. Brianna, Kincaid said, his tone deadly quiet. Did you build the dynamic cost coefficient matrix on page 12? Brianna opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked frantically at her father, then down at her expensive shoes, her confidence completely shattered. Answer the chairman, Ms. Davenport. Gwen pressed mercilessly. Because if you claim you awed that matrix, I will have Mr. Prescott walk the board through the underlying proprietary differential equations he registered with our legal department 3 years ago. I stepped forward from the back of the room, opening my leather folder and placing the original handwritten legal registration documents and time-stamped draft files directly in front of Chairman Kincaid. I authored every line of that code. Mr. Chairman, I said, my voice deep, calm, and utterly immovable. And the typo on slide 3 spelling partnership as partnership was typed by my own hand at 11:45 last night on a machine that never touched the shared network. Chairman Kincaid looked at the handwritten registration, then at the audit logs, and finally at Victor Davenport. The disgust on the chairman's face was absolute. Victor Davenport, Kincaid declared in a voice of steel, you have signed a false executive certification to this board. You have facilitated the theft of corporate trade secrets, violated federal cybersecurity statutes under Title 18, Section 1030, and breached your fundamental fiduciary duty of loyalty to this corporation. Howard, please. Victor stammered, his face pale, his composure utterly destroyed. You and your daughter will step out of this boardroom immediately, Kincaid commanded, pointing a finger toward the exit. Security is already waiting outside. You are suspended effective this second, pending formal termination for cause and referral to federal law enforcement authorities. 2 tall corporate security officers stepped into the room, escorting a weeping Brianna and a completely broken Victor Davenport down the hallway in full view of the entire executive staff. The year-long reign of nepotistic fraud and stolen credit was shattered in less than 10 minutes. Silence fell over the boardroom. The remaining board members sat in shock, looking at the evidence spread across the table. Chairman Kincaid stood up, walked around the massive mahogany table, and extended his hand directly to me. Nathaniel, Kincaid said, his voice filled with deep professional respect. On behalf of the board of directors, I offer you our deepest apologies. You built the backbone of this enterprise, and your integrity and brilliant strategic mind saved this company from catastrophic statutory liability today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I replied, shaking his hand with a firm, steady grip. Effective immediately, Kincaid announced to the room, the board hereby appoints Nathaniel Prescott as Executive Vice President of Strategic Commercial Operations. You will receive full oversight of the $50 million expansion project, a seat on the executive committee, and an immediate equity allocation matching your senior standing. A warm round of applause erupted from the board members around the table. By 5 o'clock that evening, the executive wing was quiet once more. The names of Victor and Brianna Davenport had already been scrubbed from the corporate directory, their offices cleared, their computer access permanently revoked. I walked out of my new corner office holding my briefcase, stepping onto the clean marble floor of the main corridor. As I neared the elevators, I saw Ezekiel Thorne pushing his mop bucket along the polished tile. I stopped beside him. Ezekiel looked up from his work, his calm gray eyes meeting mine. "Evening, Executive Vice President," Ezekiel said with a subtle, knowing nod. I pulled a crisp, elegant gift envelope from my coat pocket containing a personal check for $5,000 and a written recommendation for his immediate appointment as Operations Facilities Director. "Ezekiel," I said softly, handing him the envelope, "you told me this morning that bleach warns you someone wiped more than dust. Today we clean the foundation." Ezekiel took the envelope, a genuine warm smile breaking across his weathered face. "Justice has a clean smell, sir." "Yes, it does," I replied. I stepped into the elevator, the brass doors sliding smoothly shut as I rode down to begin my new chapter at the top.